tea. Earl Grey. Hot.
What a wonderful lead in.
I'm drinking it right now.
Oh, nice. A true connoisseur of Star Trek.
Welcome back, everyone, to our Star Trek subpod, Subspace transmissions. We were gamers. Star Trek subpod.
Yeah, this is the Subspace transmission series here, where Andrew and I spend a bunch of time talking about Star Trek, basically.
Because we need to.
Yeah, because it's good. That's why.
In this modern age of Star Wars, which will be funny because this episode will be released after we do a whole episode about Star Wars.
Hey, look, tis the Star Wars season, man. There's been a bunch of Star Wars stuff that's been out. We talked about Mandalorian recently. We're going to have talked about all of our Star Wars movie rankings. So, there's a lot of Star Wars going around out there. That Star Wars movie is still in the theaters, probably.
Mm-hmm. When did they release that Force Awakens film?
2015?
15, maybe.
16?
That sounds right.
Something like that.
It has been the season of Star Wars since then. And I feel like 2020 is shaping up to be Star Trek is back.
Well, they're certainly making more Star Trek than they have been in a good long time.
It's pretty clear that online CBS service is funded by and therefore being produced for Star Trek people.
Yeah. Or if not funded by, then certainly they're a high proponent or a high percentage of the subscribers. Clearly they know who's buttering the bread over there.
Exactly. So let's see, this year there's going to be Star Trek Picard. There's going to be a new season of Discovery. There's going to be Lower Decks. There's going to be another show, I believe, in there somewhere.
Is that animated show this year? Or
that's
is that
the Lower Decks show. I think that is
Lower
late
Decks,
summer,
okay.
I believe.
Yeah.
But right now, I mentioned Tea Earl Grey Hot because this month, the week after this podcast airs, I believe.
Yeah, because I think it's near end of January, right?
Yeah.
So, yep.
Will be the premiere episode of Star Trek Picard, which is maybe the thing I'm most excited for so far in 2020.
Yeah, I really want to see it. I'm excited to get in there.
Star Trek's Twitter account tweeted last month. Yeah, last month. So, of course, we waited a whole month to do it. Not sure where to start your Picard prep? Here are a few episodes to get you started. Thumbs up. They listed Datalore, Best of Both Worlds, Family, Eyeborg, and Raven, which is a Voyager episode, of course, because 7 of 9 is going to be in that show. So we took it upon ourselves to... I originally said we should just reread the recaps because I'm sure we had seen all those episodes a bunch of times.
Which, to be clear, we have seen all of these episodes before this. It's not like this is our first watching of any of these.
No. But we just rewatched them instead of reading recaps.
I rewatched almost all of them.
Right. Yeah, it's just too hard not to. That list is so good.
Some of them are really great. I don't know. Not all of them are great episodes, but we'll get into it.
Sure, it's true.
They're definitely
important. They're important, especially because of some of the sequels to some of the episodes.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get in
one of them.
Yeah, you'll definitely get into this here a bit and see. Like, these episodes really all have a theme.
Yeah, no kidding.
I think we can pick out pretty quick what the theme is.
Let's go with the non-themed episode. Datalore.
Right, yeah. The first one, right off the bat, Datalore is a season 1 episode.
It is
first.
Early, and it shows.
So, yeah. So this is the introduction of Data's brother type guy, android.
It's his brother. It's his. Yeah. I mean, I guess if you take the track that his positronic brain still means that he's a computer, then he's his. What would you call it? Like serial, like when you produce the same serial line off of an assembly line. But we just say brother, right? Because Picard makes the mistake during this episode where he calls Lore it, and Data says, well, then am I a thing as well? And he says, no, I'm sorry about that. You're not. So we'll just go with brother.
Right. And Lore is his name, and he even refers to himself as Data's brother, younger brother, because Data was technically built first. And it sounds like Lore has a bit of a personality difference with his older brother here.
Yeah. So Dr. Sung tried to create a more human android, right? He had made Data. Everyone was like, Data's cool. But Sung wasn't satisfied with the limitations of Data, where he can't mimic exact human behaviors. He cannot use contractions. Right?
Right.
He is unable to grasp humor.
The emotion stuff mostly, right?
Stuff especially is hard. So Data hasn't been able to learn those things, so he shuts him down, I guess, and tries to create Lore, which causes some major problems for that colony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It doesn't seem super important what happens in this episode, but essentially the quick recap would be they slowly come to find that Lore has ulterior intentions with the Enterprise crew involving something called the crystalline entity, which is how he ended up wiping out the colony. Oh, I guess we should say spoiler alert. I don't really.
I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know. Spoiler alert for shows that came out in like the early 90s.
Yeah, I don't.
I guess like maybe mid 90s by the time we get to Voyager, but yeah.
This is the episode, despite it being so early and kind of rough, where, half the characters are still kind of wiry. They haven't really. If you notice later on when you watch the episode, like season 3 and season 5 episodes, everyone kind of gets a little bulked up. And the uniforms fit better. they all look a little less nerdy.
We talked about we did a whole episode of this Subspace transmission on the uniforms.
Yep.
All this first season, the cast is still wearing the like one-piece jumpsuits.
Yeah.
Which universally every member of this show has come off later and said those original costumes are extremely painful to wear.
Yeah.
Like every single person said it. It's like they gather and bunch in places that are just uncomfortable for every person.
This is where a lot of the crew members had built up the habit of pulling down their uniforms when they sat down, which is something that Riker especially continues as a character to do later on in the show.
Yep.
Which is kind of funny.
If you watch it, actually, you will see every single, or not every character, but like most of the main ones, as they sit down, they will all grab the front of the shirt and pull it down.
Yep.
Right as they're hitting the chair. And it just looks like a natural motion. You don't like see it that much. But if you look for it, you're like, oh, wow, they do it a lot.
You should listen to that episode if you haven't yet. It's a good one. I like that episode quite a bit. So Lore betrays them. He betrays Data. This is one of the episodes, despite it being early, where Wesley Crusher, we get the "Shut Up, Wesley," which is extremely memeable these days.
Yeah, there's definitely. This is early enough on in the show that the show didn't really know how to use Wesley Crusher.
No.
He became a much more valuable member of the crew and the cast, I would say, later in the show's life.
Agreed.
But here in season 1, the "Shut Up, Wesley" is important because it's just like, quiet down there, little child. You're not. Let the big boys talk.
Yeah, this is like their Sequest moment, right, where they kind of like they're trying to do the family crew thing and it doesn't really work out, so they kind of quit on that later. Yeah,
it's definitely one of those like we need to get everyone together kind of a thing, and it's no, not this kind of a show.
I have a problem with that later, right? This time of mentality with the whole like Starfleet is for families kind of thing. We'll talk about that later.
Well, there's a whole lot of issues with the Starfleet is for families thing, and basically all of Star Trek. If that all these ships have all these thousands of members of crew and their families, and they have schools on board and all kinds of this stuff.
359 is part of the problem.
Yeah, man. They're like, hey, let's all go into a giant space battle.
Yeah. Don't unload your families. Anyway, I don't know. Is there much more to say about data lore other than the fact that it introduces lore and the crystalline entity? We don't know which of those two things, if not both, are going to be important for Picard and why they would have listed it. I would assume because in Nemesis we lose data, right?
Right. My suspicion here is that lore is the important one. And the reason they have us watch this is because lore will play some sort of part.
Lore plays a part in another character's arc later in our discussion here as well, which they don't list, but is kind of important. I think it's because they need you to know that data comes back through lore later, right?
Well, we will see, I guess.
I mean, so how many datas have they found? They found lore. They found that extra data during another movie.
Right. It wasn't lore. What was the name of that one? Was it... Insurrection? Was that the one? I don't know. There was another Soong android. That
one was kind of like,
I want to say it was
slate, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember that one very well. That's a bummer. Okay.
Yep.
We should have looked that one up in advance. Whoops. Anyway.
I think there's only the 3.
There's definitely that. Okay. Let's move on. The rest of the subset of episodes are either tangentially related or exactly related to being assimilated by and then removed from the Borg.
Correct.
I would say tangentially because Family and Raven are not directly related to being removed from the Borg, but they happen afterwards, right?
Oh, Family is very much related to being removed from
so
the
is
Borg.
Raven, but it's not like you watch the episode like Best of Both Worlds 2 or Eyeborg where they're talking about, or the episodes where even 7 of 9 is removed from the Borg and they do all the technobabble about the parts that are being removed and how the systems will work and the subspace dampers and the
it's a Family and the Raven when we get to them are about recovering from and what it means to come back from being assimilated.
Right. So
Best of Both Worlds is more the actual act of the assimilation and what happens. And actually, I guess we'll start it here, but it was a watershed moment in this series, I think.
It took a whole new direction to the series to say, we're going to take on multi-part episodes, obviously. Huge cliffhanger and possibly endanger the main character. And then afterwards, it really changes the whole direction of the entire Star Trek universe. Right? Like before, when they ran into the Borg, it was an episode where Q had taken them 7,000 light years away to see their future, basically. Mm-hmm. And you're kind of like, oh, okay, cool. That was a Q episode. It's not going to mean anything like every other Q episode. And then come to find out, actually, they have transwarp conduits and they're here.
Yeah.
So, why don't you recap it for us? Both parts.
Okay, so it opens with, as so many of them do, that the Enterprise is responding to some kind of distress call. It goes to some Federation colony, and they suspect that the Borg had assimilated people from this colony. We get a one-off or maybe two-off character in Lieutenant Commander Shelby who shows up. She's a female first officer level, in that she's like equivalent in rank with Riker. And her and the Admiral that come on, they have a discussion with Picard, and through it you sort of learn, well, the Federation thinks the Borg is involved, and that B, Riker has been offered his own command, and that Shelby wants to replace him.
Shelby's character is extremely headstrong, right? And that's kind of the point of this whole thing, is that they're going to start to pit different mentalities of Starfleet and it's just kind of like another watershed thing of saying there are different minds in Starfleet and they have different ideas about how to deal with combat and the Borg and things like that. This is, I think, one of the first times I remember hearing Starfleet tactical, right? Like, because they're not at war with the Klingons anymore. They're not at war in TNG with pretty much anyone.
Right.
So it's important later because different minds start to think about different things when we introduce Hugh and stuff like that. So anyway, continue.
Yep. So they, through a series of transmissions or whatever, find that there was a ship that encountered a cube-like vessel. Hey, guess what? It's a Borg cube. The Enterprise goes and checks it out. The Borg then demand that Picard specifically surrender himself. Obviously, he doesn't, because why would you surrender to the Borg? And they then kind of have a standoff between the Enterprise and the Borg. Definitely, you start learning of where the Borg is adapting to their phasers, and the Borg lock the ship in a tractor beam, and they kind of have a little standoff there. The Enterprise escapes the standoff and hides in a nebula for a while Geordi and Wesley are working on trying to figure out how to modify the deflector dish so that they can shoot some kind of thing that the Borg won't be capable of stopping, so they can blow the ship up. They're, one of those like, hey, get this done. Geordi's like, oh, this will take 2 weeks. And Riker's like, you have a week.
It gets down to 2 hours by some point, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And as the Borg move into the nebula and kind of like flush the Enterprise out, they beam over
the Enterprise.
Right, basically. They beam over and abduct Captain Picard,
who they have decided is important.
Yeah. And you don't see what happens to him until very near the end of the episode. But the cube, right after abducting him, changes course and starts heading directly to Earth. And the Enterprise follows as best it can, with Riker now in command. So they put together a plan, a last-ditch effort kind of thing to rescue Captain Picard, led by Lieutenant Commander Shelby and her away team. And they beam over to the Borg ship to try and force the cube out of warp so that they can get Picard back. And as they, prepare to do that, they see Picard, who has now been assimilated. They contact the Enterprise on the screen, and you see Picard say that he is Locutus of Borg, and you have to prepare for assimilation. And resistance is futile, and that's the end of part 1.
It's interesting that that is the end of part 1. I guess later on.
Oh, actually, I think the end of part 1 is Riker then orders them to fire.
Yeah, they shoot the ship,
the deflector dish.
Yeah. Which they have adapted for in advance, and this is important because Picard has assimilated. They've assimilated all of his tactical knowledge and things that he knew about Starfleet, and even the plan of the deflector dish, right?
And he even says, I guess like getting into part 2, but yeah, they know what he knows, right? And pretty early on in part 2, he even says, tactical error number 1. You cannot do this. I know what your plan is. Yeah. And therefore it doesn't work, right? So the very beginning of part 2 is them basically finding out that shooting the deflector dish had no effect because they had prepared, since Picard's mind had told them, right?
Yeah. Right, exactly. It's cool. It's a cool little setup, and one of the reasons I really love this era of Star Trek, because unlike the newer stuff where they're just kind of writing the book again, this type of information, hey, the Borg assimilate not just your technology or your person, but your memories and your individuality and all that sort of stuff gets sucked in there too. So there's a problem sometimes, right? Like later with Hugh, that maybe the way that they assimilate things can be their weakness as well. It's interesting.
Yeah, they kind of it's an interesting puzzle for sure.
Mm-hmm. Wolf 359 is the next big part, I think, in part 2 there.
Yeah, the Borg, you get a message from the Admiral contacting Riker as they're following the cube, saying that, oh, hey, we are gonna stop, and we're gonna stop this cube before it gets to Earth at this place, Wolf 359. We got a whole fleet of starships here. The Enterprise has been forced to stop following it because they can't follow at the high warp speed that the cube can do. So to make repairs and stuff, they stop. And they said, oh, we'll meet you guys there. Don't worry. We'll join the fight. However, when they do eventually catch up to the fleet at Wolf 359, they find out they are way too late. And it didn't go good for our friends in Starfleet there.
No. Many of them perish.
Yeah.
Basically, they should. I think the Admiral and everyone else, right? Basically.
Right. Almost the entire fleet there is destroyed. And there's a bunch of ships. And this event, like this fight at Wolf 359, ends up becoming like a big, like kind of a big moment in Federation history later.
A historic, moment. It's a touchstone for a lot of other characters as well, including Sisko. We've talked about in the last episode. One of the things I wonder how, and I know why, obviously, but Picard, right, is assimilated and knows how dangerous the Enterprise is. He has to respect number one and all those people. It speaks to either, and maybe this is the answer, Picard's hubris a little bit, that the cube doesn't just turn around and blow away the Enterprise.
Well, it is disabled as the cube is heading to Earth,
Yeah.
So they can, and I assume the Borg could predict that they wouldn't be able to fix it fast enough to stop them from fighting all the fleet. But I guess at the end of the day, the Borg are pretty single-minded about what they're looking for here, and it is assimilation.
Yeah.
And kind of everything else is whatever.
Good point.
Yeah.
All right,
so
continue on.
So we move on. The Enterprise keeps following the. Now that the fleet has been destroyed, the Enterprise keeps following the trail of the cube and offers to negotiate with Locutus. And then, of course, he just tells them that there will be no negotiation. Resistance is futile. And they then do which maybe this was the first time, I don't know if it was, but they separate the saucer section here in a kind of last minute, in an attempt to give the Borg more things to shoot at. Yeah.
This is a distraction, right?
Right. They basically, and of course Picard knew they had this option available, so he even tells them again, Riker, that hey, this is, once again, I already knew you were doing this, so I know what to do here. But Riker flips the script, and instead of firing from the not the saucer section, right? What is the other section? The star drive section? I don't know what they call the other one. Anyway, Riker does the opposite, right, and shoots from the saucer.
Right.
And he starts firing this antimatter spread, which basically they use to help disrupt the Borg sensors enough so that they can get a shuttlecraft with Data and Worf through the Borg shields and aboard the cube to get Picard back, which is sort of their plan all along. This works. They kidnap Locutus and bring him back. However, the Borg don't care, and then they leave and keep going straight for Earth.
Yeah, they got all his info. As much as they wanted him to be the spokesperson of the Borg, right? One drone isn't that important, even if it is Locutus. At least at this point in the show. It becomes more important later, I guess, when Borg Queens become a thing and Q recognizes him as Locutus and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, but at this point, we just have a captive Borg here. They're trying to disable his weapons, and they're trying to figure out how they can use Picard to get back at the Borg that are rapidly heading towards Earth. And I don't. So they basically, they're using data to connect to the Borg, to the machine part of the Borg through Picard, right? And Data is doing a bunch of techno magic. Essentially, is like, oh, let's try and disable their shields. It's encrypted. I can't. Or I can't do this thing or this other thing. What ideas does anyone have? And they all kind of are out of ideas. Data has tried accessing every routine he can think of that would be beneficial to their fight against the cube. And you get the moment where Picard breaks out, right?
Oh, no.
And mutters, he grabs Data's hand, right? And tells him, sleep. And that's all you get. And it's not sure, like the crew around him interprets it as, oh, he wants to sleep. He's exhausted from this ordeal. He's really tired. But Data has his thinking cap on, and actually what Picard was suggesting here is that he command all the Borg units to enter their sleeping regenerating mode, which is apparently not a protected routine, which caused them to then turn off all their weapons and their shields, and the cube stops.
Pew pew.
So then they build a feedback loop into the cube and blow it up. And then Dr. Crusher and Data can work on removing all of the Borg components from Picard. Yay, we saved the day.
Yay. Who has all his components removed without any issues, because they explain later he has not been assimilated for very long, so the nanites and all that have not integrated with his body permanently.
Right, so they are able to remove the Borg coverings because they were just, covering as opposed to completely within his system.
Yep. Whew, that's a heavy one.
Riker turns down his command of his own ship again.
Well, considering the Melbourne got blown up.
Yeah, and Shelby decides to take a commission as the officer dedicated to rebuilding the fleet. So that's the last we see of her, I think, or if we see her again, it's one of those one-off real quick.
Yeah, I can't remember seeing her again. I would feel like we do.
Yeah,
I don't remember. This is another thing I didn't look up.
But for our intents and purposes, really, she's done. But you definitely, the last scene, they take the Enterprise back to a shipyard near Earth for repairs, and the last scene you get is Picard looking out, and he looks like he's disturbed, like he didn't have a good time with all this.
That's an understatement.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Like you said, it's just going to be one of those things that drives his character. And a man that was overly rational and, like I said earlier, often prone to hubris because of his mental acuity, becomes a broken individual when it comes to the Borg, which is important later on.
Yep.
But that, I think we spent a lot of time here because it's really important as far as what's going to happen, obviously, in this show, considering what they've focused on to tell us to watch here, and also because it becomes so important for Picard. It changes his destiny in a way, and it changes the future of the Star Trek universe, and how it becomes about how does humanity deal with an issue like the Borg, which is kind of treated as inevitable, maybe.
Right. Something that's like a something they really can't beat with technology, right?
Or they could, but in some ways Are they going to be faced with issues that they can't deal with within their own moral compass?
Right, definitely, yeah. So, and it was it was like a smash critical hit at the time. This was as a 2-part episode. This was a cliffhanger between seasons. So you kind of end the first part on Riker telling Worf to fire the deflector dish at the cube as Picard is talking to them. And that's the end of the season. And so then there's a whole year between then and when the next episode comes out and you find out that it didn't do anything.
Yeah. Which is it's got to have been like, wait,
great
what?
drama. Oh yeah.
Do anything?
I'm sure
we waited 6 months for this.
Yeah. So it was a long time. And again, one of these this episode pair here is definitely one of the ones that if you ask someone about the Next Generation, they probably remember this one. Or these are the ones that are one of the most well known.
Yeah. They'll remember it.
Yeah.
I like it a lot. I mean, it's just one of those ones where it feels like light at the beginning, and then it just spirals down this dark path towards the end of the first episode, and it's so good to watch. It's so good. We're just like, oh man, this is getting out of control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's good. All right, family is the one we should talk about next, or should we go?
Well, we can go in
to Hugh
go in
instead.
Let's go in order here.
Okay.
So family is in fact the exact next episode after the Best of Both Worlds Part 2. So the Enterprise is still in space dock and they are repairing it, and so the crew gets some time off. And we hear from Picard that he is going to go visit his family in France, and Worf's parents are going to come to see him.
He's not happy about that, but I don't know that that's really the focus of our episode or time here on this podcast.
Well, crucially, earlier in season 3, right, Worf was discommendated, via from the Klingon Empire because of his issue with, not accepting the Klingon High Council and all the stuff that's going on over there. So Worf kind of accepts the dishonor of his family here, and so his human parents are coming to comfort him, and his dad wants to see the ship.
Right.
But really the stuff we're interested in for the purposes of Picard is Jean-Luc coming back to his family's vineyard in Labar, France.
He needs some R&R. He gets a little flack for going there from Troy, and I don't understand why. Maybe because she's trying to say you need to know what you're dealing with when you go there instead of trying to ignore it, maybe?
Maybe, yeah.
Anyway, continue.
So the family is run by his elder brother, Robert, and then his wife, and then their son, Rene. And basically, this is Picard coming home. It's clear he hasn't been home in a really long time. He has never met Rene. And Rene is a boy of what? How old did you say the kid is?
10? Maybe less.
Yeah. And then he meets his brother's wife, and it's clear he's also never met her before.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she's like,
so.
"Oh, it's so nice to finally meet you, Jean-Luc," and he's like, "For me as well." And it's, whoa, dude! I'm pretty sure your brother's been married for quite a while, based on like how they act and what's going on. So,
maybe I just missed that part. I didn't get that part where it was like
one line when they first met, basically.
Okay.
That was the impression that I got.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's tough. Like basically, it's just a lot of Picard, coming back, and he and his brother clearly don't like each other.
His brother clearly doesn't like his choice to be in Starfleet and not on the. I would say Robert loves him because he's his brother, but also hates him for being in Starfleet and not on the Vineyard, right?
he left the family business essentially, right? And
so he's bitter about that, I would say.
Right.
And he has this like irrational hatred of technology, right? So Picard, I remember he says, "Oh, you found the best cook in France," and he's like, "Yeah, because it doesn't come out of a replicator." It's like, okay, dude, calm down.
Well, they even talk about like, oh, I remember when Picard says, "Oh, I remember when father and mother would argue about getting a replicator, and father said no," and that was the end of the discussion, right? And,
right.
And Robert is like, "Yes, great." No replicators. I'm against all this technology. Life is too easy. We've made things too great. Everyone needs to be here and work on the farm.
Yep.
And it is. You get the impression that he even straight up says he's jealous of what Picard has done, right?
Oh, very much so. But it's also the kind of, it's the Star Trek way of saying, like, hey, there's an actual issue here of technology in the future overtaking our lives, and we lose out on some of these things. Like, Chateau Picard's wine is so good because Robert tills it all by hand and goes out and touches every grape, and
he helps keep the old ways. And I think there's even like a mention at some point when Picard is talking to his other friend, which is kind of like the C plot of this episode, but you get the impression that like this vineyard is only one of the few that does it this way. Most of them are not done this way anymore. This is kind of like a throwaway line. It's like, oh, it's great that he tries to keep the old traditions or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
And it's a case where like it's clear that he doesn't want to change, and good or bad, it is what it is, right?
I love that they have the same hair.
I know. This actor, who Jeremy Kemp, who sadly has passed away, is a wonderful actor. I actually really liked his performance as Robert here, and I wondered for a while if he was going to come back in Picard, but obviously not, since he passed away in 1998.
Well, also, I have a hard time watching this episode. He can't come back. As we learn in Generations, the one where they have the ribbon. Picard doesn't want to leave the ribbon because inside the ribbon are Robert and Renee, who he tells us in Generations he never told anyone on the ship, but they died in a fire.
Ah, okay. I had forgotten that aspect.
Yeah,
yes.
this is kind of I got a little teary when I rewatched this, and Renee comes on, and they have that moment where he's like, "Oh, you're my nephew from the Enterprise," and
right.
"Oh no, I'm your uncle, or you're my uncle then," and they do that in the ribbon, that little scene in the ribbon, and it's like heartbreaking thinking about it.
And the Renee is so cute as he's talking to Picard when they first meet, and he's like, "What is arrogant son of a..." Okay, son. We don't need to talk about this.
Yeah,
it's not important.
It's not like super hard to watch, but like I definitely got like a little misty, being like, "Oh man, this." I know what happens to him and Robert, and it's like,
I didn't remember actually that part of the history of it, so that's it definitely puts a different spin on watching it for sure.
A little bit, doesn't it? Yeah.
During his time there, he is kind of tempted to start working on this underwater research project with his other friend from home.
Yeah, hey, maybe don't go back to Starfleet. Stay on the planet. You can get to know your family better. You can work in the ocean. It's kind of
right.
like exploring.
And, that they're talking about, it's a new frontier. We're talking about raising a continent and doing all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. And, Jean-Luc starts seriously considering it, which, the friend is delighted by. But eventually, after... I don't know, some wine is consumed,
mm-hmm.
And not the synthahol stuff, which Robert of course hates, but the real stuff. He and Robert get into a straight up fist fight.
Yes, they do,
and are rolling around in the mud and trying to fight each other, which then culminates in them laughing because there's two old guys covered in mud and they look like idiots. But Picard basically breaks down and admits that he still feels guilty and powerless about all the stuff he did while he was assimilated. Like, he remembers everything. He blames himself for not being strong enough to stop it. And his brother, always the older brother, is basically like, look, you're human. That's just what it means. I forget what his line was. It was so good. It's like, oh, I guess my brother is human after all. Mm-hmm. Something like that. And at the end, you're just going to have to learn to live with what you did. And whether that means you live with it down here with us or up there in the stars with your ship, you're still going to have to live with it.
Yeah, you can't avoid it either place.
And then he and his brother resolve their differences. Covered in mud, they go back home and drink a bunch more wine.
That's kind of the big moment there, right? I don't know that.
Yeah, it's the big resolution is them in the mud for sure, and kind of they get along as brothers. Whether they still agree with everything, probably not, but at least they are. Their big emotional moment happens here, and kind of gets Picard's head back on straight. That I don't want to stay down here on Earth. I want to go back to Starfleet.
All right, we can jam through these last two episodes pretty quickly, I think, because the first one pretty easily. Maybe not. I don't know. So the next one up that we had on the list was first was Data Lore, the Best of Both Worlds family, and then something called Eyeborg, which introduces the character Hugh to the universe.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Hugh is a disconnected drone that they find in a crashed drone scout ship, and they basically separate him from the collective by blocking off his transmitters.
Mm-hmm.
Picard immediately comes up with a plan to use some sort of virus or something and use him like a typhoid Mary and send him back to the collective to kill them all.
Exactly.
Guinan is totally cool with that plan.
Right. Guinan, whose people were assimilated by the Borg, it is like, yeah, this seems good.
Another plot point in Generations. Generations. The same movie. Right. Because Talarian is also Guinan's same people. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. They talk about here, the senior crew kind of deliberate the idea that isn't this kind of like us committing genocide, maybe?
Yep. This is most of the episode, and one that is worth watching for that reason alone.
Yeah, the ethics of it and kind of what they decide is really interesting, for sure. Definitely the best stuff here.
Hugh begins to use the word I.
Mm-hmm.
And so Picard says, well, we'll give him the choice in the long run of whether he would like to stay as an individual with us or go back to the collective. He makes an interesting decision, I think, based on his friendship with LaForge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is not, I think, what most people would have done, right? Maybe because he was Borg for so long or whatever, but he uses his friendship with LaForge to say, there's a chance that if I go back to the collective, I could influence them or something like that, but I don't want to stay here and be responsible or see what happens if you guys are assimilated by the Borg.
Right.
Which is a weird choice, maybe, but it definitely removes them from being able to do the whole what do you call it? Genocide idea of introducing the virus and all that. Yeah. And Guinan even changes her mind after she talks with Hugh.
Yeah, sort of once they kind of accept that he is a person and not just this member of this faceless evil race or whatever,
mm-hmm.
then you have to accept that, well, you can't just infect this person with something that's going to wipe out everyone. And it's an interesting moral quandary for sure.
Right. So they eventually take him back to the crash site and remove that thing so that his beacon can reach the Borg, who then come pick him up again and take him back to the collective. And it's a short description of a long episode with a lot of emotion in it.
Yeah. They kind of hope that, like, because he's eventually referring to himself as I, which is not a Borg thing, right? It's always we, the Borg.
Right.
They hope that his individualism, as he gets reassimilated, will, spread kind of like the same way that the virus they hoped would. It's
interesting to think that because they know individuals are coming in, they're immune to the individuality of new Borg. But like if a Borg drone is reintegrated, they don't like have a safeguard, for the Borg, for the drone to have become an individual. So that's a weird thing that they introduce here in this episode, but it pans out. I don't know. It wasn't on the list really, which is odd because the next episode of this is a two-parter. If you follow Hugh's story with Descent and Descent 2, I don't know if you remember those.
I don't. The next episode in order is called The Next Phase.
No, so this is a couple seasons later. I think it might be a full season later. It might be like a full season later, but they run into they're getting attacked by Borg, but the attacks do not like follow Borg protocols or whatever. So they trace the attacks back to the cube that has been taken over by Lore.
Right, yes.
Because Hugh's individuality infected the cube and the Borg cut the cube off.
Right. Yeah, the rogue Borg. Yes.
Yeah. Hugh is leading an underground resistance against Lore. It's weird that they didn't include this in the list because it includes Lore and Hugh,
I think
and it leads to Lore's death too.
I think the reason for not including it is likely they're not interested in the further adventures of these people. It's more of a like, hey, here are these people. Let's set up who they are and what they're going through.
And it doesn't speak to the removal from the collective like all the rest of these episodes do.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think it might end up being important that, Lore and Hugh knew each other and Lore gets deactivated because of Hugh, basically. I did look it up, by the way. The other android we were thinking of is called B4.
Ah, okay.
And there's that little scene at the end of Nemesis, I think it is, or Insurrection or whatever, where Data dies, but he's transferred all his knowledge into B4 to try and help him become a better android because he's not very sophisticated. I guess it turns out that all of them end up being deactivated. I didn't realize there were so many Soong androids. Like he made one of his wife. I forgot about that one.
The one of his wife was was the third one I was thinking of because that's like supposedly his best one or whatever.
That's the one that could age, which is
right.
It's just like related to Lol in a way, which I remembered Lol, I guess, but that's not a Soong android. That's Data's.
Right, I would say that Data created that one.
Anyway, I forgot about it. And then supposedly there's two more that we don't remember, but whatever.
Whatever. So it'll be interesting to see how Hugh and the Borg here from this Eyeborg episode, how he shows up in Picard.
The character has to, right? I mean,
they said he is. There's a guy cast as him, so he's
the same guy
in the show. No,
it's not. Oh,
I don't think so.
Oh. Everybody else is the same.
Yeah, I don't believe it's the same person.
Okay, well, c'est la vie. You can't get everybody. Okay, that leaves us with Raven on their list here, which is an odd standout of a Voyager episode, obviously.
Oh, actually, it is the same person. I'm wrong.
Aha! They got him. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Del Arco.
Del Arco, the same person. Yep.
I wonder what he's done since. Oh, he played another character called Phantom.
No research. Moving on.
It's really easy to keep Memory Alpha open while we do this.
Yeah, it is.
And then you just fall down a click hole of like, all right. He auditioned for the role of Wesley Crusher at the beginning of Next Generation. Okay.
How different our lives would have been.
I don't know how you mean that, but that's awesome.
Well, I don't know. I mean, like,
If anyone except for
Will Wheaton has
Will
gone on to embrace the like silliness of that character and in the rest of his life, and
Right.
I wonder if this guy would have done the same.
Yeah, you got to wonder, right? A lot of the actors did, though. You know, even Tasha Yar, like embracing that she's a beloved character that died so early on. You know, and still embracing Star Trek, even though she was only on it for one season,
Season and a half or something.
season and a half, yeah. Okay, so that leaves Raven, which is an episode
Of Voyager.
that I want to preface by saying a lot of people think is good.
This episode is good?
A lot of people think this episode is good.
I don't necessarily think they're wrong in the context of it's a good episode of Voyager.
Okay. Of Voyager, it's a good episode. I have a real big problem with it.
Let's hear it.
We have to recap the show first.
Do we? I don't know. Okay.
Well, we'll do it real fast.
7 of 9 is a liberated Borg drone who has been living on their ship, Voyager, and she starts having flashbacks and
to a Raven attacking and Borg attacking her.
A bird and Raven and a Borg attacking, and there's a whole reason why, but it doesn't matter. She steals a ship and goes and finds this crashed Federation ship
called the Raven.
Which turns out to be the ship that she and her parents were on when they were assimilated.
Okay.
That's the thing. Basically, it's sort of her, some kind of like post-traumatic stress, remembering where she was from or what was going on when she was assimilated. That's
Annika Hansen.
That's her name.
Is her name. Her real name. She chooses not to go by it even after they figure out who it is. It turns out midway through the episode, when they read her journal, that apparently the Hansens were quite famous in the Federation.
Mildly famous scientists of repute.
So when she figures out that the bird that's attacking her is a Raven, Janeway is able to say, "Oh my goodness, it's a Raven. Quick, scan for Federation vessels." And an amazing piece of knowledge to have remembered in the middle of the Delta Quadrant from years and years beforehand.
Yeah.
But it turns out the Raven was a science research vessel that followed a Borg cube through a transwarp conduit into the Delta Quadrant, and they had a modulating shield frequency that hid them from the Borg, including on personal shields that they could wear while they transported over into Borg cubes and studied the Borg.
You don't find any of this out in this episode, by the way. All of that is in subsequent episodes.
No, you don't find it all out in this episode, but it's important to know this stuff. Because
not as far as this episode is concerned.
This episode is about her coming to deal with the fact that she is no longer attached to the Borg, right? So, like, in the middle of this, she thinks that she's being summoned to this place by the Borg.
Right.
Right? And so she goes through thinking, and this is very similar to the Hugh episode, she has this moment where, hey, I'm going to rejoin the collective, but when I rejoin the collective, Tuvok, who has caught up with her to try and stop her from going to this place where she shouldn't be because it's in a territory that they're not allowed to go, she says, I'm not going to let them assimilate you, don't worry. Like, I'm going to rejoin when I get there, because she thinks she's headed to the Borg, but you're my crew and friend, you know, and so there's that whole coming to understand what it means to be liberated Borg and all that sort of stuff. And that's what I think they want you to watch. But that's literally what this episode is about. So all this other stuff that you're having issues with is not brought up in this episode. I'm just saying. It is brought up at the end of it. And when Janeway tells her, here's a file about your parents.
Right.
And this is all the information that's in the file. And she says, they were amazing people. And I am irate with the idea that they did all this stuff with the Borg and took their 3-year-old on a ship into the Delta Quadrant to study the Borg.
I mean, I don't know how this is any worse than Picard and the Enterprise having a bunch of kids on board either.
And that's what we talked about. I said when Wolf 359 happens, we're going to talk about it later on with like Starfleet just being like, families are totally cool on ships. You'd think they'd have learned their lesson a few times. And moreover, you'd think that we're going to go study the most dangerous things in the galaxy, but we have these modulating shields, so our 3-year-old will be totally safe in the Delta Quadrant with us wandering around with no plan to get back.
I don't think they intended to go to the Delta Quadrant to start
they
with.
definitely did. They followed it through the conduit.
Yeah, but did they intend to follow it through the conduit, or were they just following it?
I'm pretty sure they did. It just makes me so mad when she says they were really great people. I'm like, no. No,
well, they could be bad. You could be bad parents and still be a okay person, right?
It's a weird glossing over of something.
Janeway wouldn't have known that they were like terrible parents anyway. She's only read their scientific papers. So.
Look, they took a 3-year-old on a ship studying the Borg.
Did they talk about the 3-year-old in the scientific papers? Probably not, right? She's not on the byline. The 3-year-old doesn't get partial credit.
It's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So, because she's assimilated when she's 3, 7 of 9 has different issues being separated from the Borg than most other Borg do. Right.
Right. And the sort of crux of this story is that she mistook the like homing signal from the ship as the Borg calling her back, but really it was sort of her subconscious remembering and like going through the process of becoming human again, even.
This episode, just because of what the parents do to, like she wouldn't have been assimilated, and that just makes me mad. So it starts to dredge up bad memories.
The parent in you is overriding your sense of person who's having fun watching Star Trek.
I agree. I understand.
I get it.
I don't say that I'm immune to that kind of thing.
There is a fun scene here where this is the first time 7 of 9 eats food. Because the Borg don't eat, right? They have like nutrients supplied to them via intravenous or whatever.
Yeah, and the doctor has to give her a list of stuff she should eat, and instead of giving her like, okay, have like 6 ounces of chicken breast, he gives her like, here, you need polypeptides, 8 parts.
Yeah, this is like a totally like a breakdown of like amino acids and stuff. She's like, what?
Well, no, she kind of understands that, and I think the doctor and 7 of 9 over the course of that show are extremely simpatico, right? They become best buds because they have the same very
like a
mechanical view of the world and how it functions. Even though the doctor ends up, because he gets switched on for so long, like developing personality, and then kind of moves away from that. So does 7 of 9, but they do it together. Mm-hmm. This kind of moment where she takes that to Neelix, and he's just like, I'm gonna just make you this boiled meat.
He's like, you know what, we're just gonna try something not spicy. It's like steamed vegetables. We're gonna go with that,
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Sad that the scene is ruined by her little homing beacon thing when she shoves him over.
Yeah, bummer.
Yeah.
But that was a good part of this episode.
It was pretty funny.
I hadn't watched any Voyager in a while, and I have to comment that what were the people that made 7 of 9's outfit thinking? It looks so uncomfortable. There's no way that outfit could be like something a person would wear on a regular basis.
It is 100% glaringly obvious, like that is the beginning of changing over how costuming in Hollywood worked.
Yeah, it's
just such a moment where you're like, huh, that's a costume. Okay.
And in this episode, she's wearing this like brown thing. There's like very clearly some kind of like ribbed corset or something underneath, meant to
very
show
clearly.
that like, oh look, she's like still, not a human under there. It's like, parts or whatever.
Right, because we mentioned earlier, Picard's stuff could all come out, but 7 of 9 still has Borg implants in her because they're integrated with her organs at this point. She's been assimilated for 20 years, 30 years, whatever.
Right. And it's just, it'd been a long time since I had watched this show, and I just didn't remember like how ridiculous it looked. Just so ridiculous.
It's
Man.
funny watching it, and you're like, oh yeah, those uniforms, because they're on Voyager. They're stuck with the old uniforms.
Yep.
And then 7 of 9 comes along, and you're like, oh, got it. So costuming had changed, but they were stuck because of story reasons.
Yep.
And now, nowadays the costuming has gotten better with Discovery, but even the men's uniforms are quite form-fitting.
Yeah. This is like the epitome of like 90s, what's cool in space, form-fitting outfits.
We can do that now.
Yeah.
I have to imagine she was very uncomfortable, Jerry Ryan.
Oh, I believe she's given interviews and stuff that was like, yeah, it's terrible. Like I had production stops for 20 minutes if I have to go to the restroom or something.
Oh no.
Yeah, not great. But yeah, this episode, I know you have a lot of issues. The parents' actions, which honestly they're bad. So yeah,
it just
defense
dredges
for me.
up issues that come later, right? Where like this episode in itself is fine. It's not like right home great, but it is that emotional moment of realizing you're separate and an individual completely.
Yeah, and 7 accepting that, hey, she really isn't ever going back to the Borg now. It's kind of over, and she needs to, understand who she is now as a separate person, and that's kind of the emotional thrust of where the episode is going.
Yeah.
Which is the thing that lines up with a lot of these other ones that we saw.
I had to reread before watching that episode how she was. I couldn't remember how she was separated. I remembered how they introduced her, right? Like with that whole needing to fight species 8-4 or whatever.
Evil alien species
8472, the bio species, and then how she was like trying to take over Voyager, but I couldn't remember how they separated her. And I'm like surprised that she's totally chill this close after that,
Oh, Voyager is also a weird show in that, like, you could believe that every episode of TNG is kind of like, who knows how much time has passed in between these things, although he gives star dates at the beginning. So, but in Voyager, like, it really could be, and they even say sometimes at the opening of episodes, like, it's been 3 weeks since the last time, like, kind of stuff, right? So, like, there's a ton of time that passes in Voyager that isn't on screen. So they could have done one of those where it's like, oh, it's been like 3 weeks or 3 months since we recovered from the Borg. We disassembled all the assimilation stuff, and 7 is still here, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a whole thing. So do you feel, after watching all these, do you feel prepared for Picard?
I think there's a lot more in terms of story that they have left out. I think I get clearly that, the woman in the trailer that is finding Picard has something to do with the Borg, right? Like now we know for sure.
Yeah.
That she's some sort of Borg hybrid or
something.
Right?
Something Borgy.
Hopefully they explain it quickly and get that part over with so we can get on with the show and it's not like some sort of mystery thing. But I think there's a whole bunch of stuff in here too. If they're going to go this route of like the Borg, it's interesting that they didn't have a whole bunch of like story episodes or at least like a story primer, because there's the whole like Unimatrix Zero collective civil war that's happening that we don't know how that ends.
I think you're right, basically. The Picard seems like they really want you to remember about the Borg and what happens when you get out of the Borg, right? It seems like that's going to be some kind of major thrust of the show.
One would imagine. I mean, these are very, very close episodes. The only missing one is the lore, right?
Yeah,
and
so that's the anomalous one to me. Like, what does that mean, show?
It's anomalous because lore isn't the one that has Data's memories. B4 is. So
right.
They didn't tell you to go watch any of the movies where it explains that Data's still kind of alive in memory. They didn't have you to watch the movie about the Borg where it explains the Borg queens. They didn't have you watch any of the episodes about what's going on inside the collective from Voyager. So one looks at the show and says, it seems like they did a lot of research and time to kind of come up with a plot that would drag Picard back out into the galaxy. They're bringing back tons of characters from TNG and Voyager that are Borg related. So you'd think that this is going to be very story driven based on the history of
his history with the Borg.
Right, of all the history of the Borg. And so I wonder how tertiary it's going to be instead. I hope it's not going to be, but then people are going to feel lost if it does have like, oh, the Borg collective is in civil war and this is like a weapon from one side attacking the, like, I get the feeling that maybe, they're not giving Picard command of like the newest and fastest, most powerful vessel or whatever to go out there and fight the Borg. So maybe we're going to be finding out about, a small section of Borg or a sect or something that is in this one area doing something. Maybe that kind of a thing where it's not like you don't need to know about the greater, what is happening with the whole greater collective because they're everywhere, right? All over doing whatever their thing is. Well, and the Borg assimilate, right? So there's a chance that there's a whole story about the things they've assimilated that you find out through Voyager and through Hugh, that everyone's got memories from everyone else, like Seven has memories from the Battle of 359 and
yeah, you can do the whole what does it mean to come out of the story 5,000 different ways for as many species as there have been, right? So
it's going to be weird.
Yeah, I'm excited. I hope it's good, like we said before, we want it to be good.
We do. I don't know. So I think as we wrap up our Prep for Picard episode, which is the hashtag they used, I didn't make that up.
Not a great one.
Not a great one, but there's very less descriptions I could come up with. My brain is not. I need more Earl Grey, please. Where's my replicator?
Man, so helpful.
I don't know. I think you're going to get your wish. The dog's not going to be a thing.
I think that was clear pretty quickly when they stopped showing him in marketing.
Yeah.
If he was going to be a thing like permanently, they would have kept him in the marketing. But I think they had him there for that one little joke that his name was number one. He'll be in some scene, right? Like we're going to see him. But
I think there's going to be a lot of cameos from TNG people. I think it's already been shown, a couple of them. What is maybe a thing you're hoping to see or not see as we get into this next week by the time this comes out?
Yeah. I'm hoping, I think I just want a show that is more like that is less like Discovery and more like TNG or DS9. I think that's what I'm hoping for. Whether that means like it doesn't need to have or it doesn't need to do a like weekly, anthology kind of thing like those shows did. It can still have a linear plot if that's what they want. I assume that's what they will want. But the sentiments and the production design and the kind of like the situations that arise in Discovery, in a lot of cases to me didn't feel really like at the same, like with the same kind of optimism or the same kind of feeling that I got from DS9 and TNG. So I'm hoping we get some more of stuff like that.
It's going to have to depend on the way that they write Picard.
Totally.
Picard still is optimistic about the world or not.
Yes. So I hope we don't get the broken old man Picard and that we still get the hopeful, aspiring guy.
I feel like it's going to have a very Firefly vibe to it.
I liked Firefly. I'm okay with that.
It seems like it, right? Like the crew that they've shown is a crew of misfits and like rejects, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the ship doesn't look like a Federation ship because the Federation doesn't care about what Picard wants to do, whatever he wants to do. Like,
yeah.
So my hope is they've shown a lot of 7 of 9 in the marketing. And my hope is that when they bring in characters from the past, like these two Borg characters we've had to look at, it's pretty clear like Data and Riker and all those ones are going to be one-offs. But I think if they're going to try and bring in a character with a bigger plot point, that we get them for longer than like one episode, that they become an integral part of the plot, at least for more than one or two spots. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if they do what they have done with Philippa Georgiou in Discovery,
dude, I would
bring her
be
back for several episodes.
So happy if that's the kind of that's what you nailed it. That's exactly what I mean. Where we had such a good character like Philippa, and we thought we were robbed of her early on, and then they brought her back.
She was only in the first couple. Like they had Michelle Yeoh for like 4 episodes, and that was it.
Yeah,
but yeah, I would love that too. That would be a great way to get some of these people.
It would make it feel more like those shows, I think, is what I'm getting at. That like we have the same desire, and I want to get there a different way.
Okay. Yeah, look, I'm in for it, man.
Yeah.
I think they've got us either way, so they know.
Yeah, they know.
We're the people who are going to watch, no matter what it is.
They know. This has been another Subspace transmission. I hope that we'll be talking some Picard when we see you next month. But in the meantime, if you want to catch up on the other 14 episodes of this sub-pod, or if you want to listen to a podcast about not having time to play video games, instead talking about them, where would you go?
Yeah. You could go to Spotify and find us on Spotify. Search for We Were Gamers on there, and you'll get both this episode and all the previous ones on there. We're also on YouTube. You can go to YouTube and search for We Were Gamers, and you'll find this podcast and others sorted helpfully into wonderful playlists and various ways of listening. We're also available on your podcasting app of choice, Stitcher and Apple Podcasts, Google Play, all the various places that you can find a podcast. You can find us. And we're on social media at We Were Gamers on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the fun places you can hear us talk to you about this show.